everybody, Adam here from Menta Watches. Welcome to our final video of the year. Thank you guys so much for being with us this entire amazing year of 2024. We hope that you've enjoyed our videos thus far this year. They were entertaining for you, hopefully a little bit of education mixed in there as well, and we hope to continue that trend in 2025. For our final video of the year, we're going to go over the most recent auctions of New York that closed out the 2024 auction season. We had 3 major auction houses with Sotheby's, Christie's, and Phillips. I made a list of all of the interesting results. We only got through Christie's and Sotheby's. That's not a knock on Phillips. There was just so much stuff in Christie's and Sotheby's, which I went over first, which led me to believe I really didn't need to go over into Phillips. It would be a little bit redundant, and this video would drag on forever, which nobody wants. To start things off, very simply put, the way I generally look at auction results as an indicator of the market is how much can I buy? We will bid in any given auction anywhere from 6 watches to 25 watches per auction catalog, depending on what's in it and how vintage heavy it is. And it really gives me a good sense of how the market's doing based on what I'm able to buy. The less I'm able to buy, the stronger the market. The more I'm able to buy, maybe the weaker the market is. To be completely blunt, in this auction season, out of all of the auction houses, we won 0 watches in the live sale, and we won 2 watches, one in Christie's, one in Sotheby's, in their online sales. We're not going to go into the online auction sales because there were a lot of lots. Just again, this would take forever. There were some interesting results in there too, though. You should look for yourself. Now, does that mean that I'm saying that the market is very strong? Maybe. I do actually think the market is relatively strong right now. I know some people have commented when I've made this assertion in the past that, oh, that just means you're cheap. Maybe you're right. But generally speaking, we try to bid where we think the market is, plus a margin, or leaving ourselves a margin of at least 5 to 10% to resell. So if I don't think that there's money above that, I won't bid. And sometimes you'll see that we're actually the underbidder or the second underbidder, meaning that the watch ended with an all-in price of where I thought the retail price genuinely should be. Sometimes I get lucky and I get it a little cheaper and I'm able to resell it. And other times I'm blown completely out of the water. Sometimes that's an anomaly. Sometimes it is just me missing the mark on the market. And sometimes, yeah, like somebody says, I'm cheap. I generally don't think that's the case too often. Sure, it might be me being ultra conservative on a few lots. I've separated the results between auction houses and then within the auction houses between what I thought were big results, a couple silly and weird results, not a lot, mid-tier results, and then what I classified as a soft market for certain watches that I wanted to discuss. So let's start with Christie's and let's jump right into the big results. We will start off with lot 24, which was an Audemars Piguet reference 25798. It was a jump hour minute repeating Jean Schaefer model in yellow gold. The estimate was $30,000 to $50,000. It sold for a whopping $138,600. So why the huge result against such a lower estimate? Personally, I don't know. I think it was such a cool watch, but also a very niche watch. The Schaefer model case style has not typically been very popular, but people are looking for something a little bit different. It was produced in very low quantities. While the jump hour complication used to not be very popular, people are really looking for that kind of stuff, especially from the Art Deco era of the 30s with Cartier and stuff like that. So I think just the combination of the uniqueness of the layout and minute repeater kind of pushed this one over the edge. It's an impossible watch to find if you really wanted another one. Maybe that's why the price was so high and the result was somewhat justified. I don't know. Next lot we had is lot 33, which was a Patek Philippe perpetual calendar chronograph reference 3970 ER for rose gold. This was a second series example. Guys, I've been saying this for, I don't know, a decade, how undervalued I thought the 3970 was. It's the successor to the 1518 2499, and for me, one of the most quintessential Patek Philippe watches you could get. Standard yellow gold models for the longest time were trading anywhere from $60,000 to $100,000 depending on the completeness and condition. Now you would be lucky to touch one for under $100,000. This one was a second series, also complete box and papers. With the second series models, there are 2 different kind of case styles, one that have a big hallmark on the lugs, which generally bring more money because it has this huge stamp on the side of the lug. This one did not have it. It still sold for what I thought was a crazy price, $277,200. I think it is going to be very difficult to trade in these watches if you have not picked one up at this point, and you're just going to have to pay the new market price, which is finally caught up to where I thought they would be for so many years. They are exceptional watches. I actually happen to be wearing one with an integrated bracelet in yellow gold right now. fantastic watches. I think they are such tremendous value for the money, and I think as time will show us, they're watches that really are special and deserve to be collected. Christie's actually, to their credit, had a lot of really strong watches and strong results, so I only picked out a few. Picked out one that we actually did bid on, which was lot 52, which was a Vacheron Constantin 222 in solid yellow gold. It was in absolute mint condition, and it also had extras with it that I'd never seen sold with it before. I think there was a money clip, a 222 money clip, and the tool that they would give you, I guess, when they sold you the watch, which I'd never seen before, I didn't even know existed, to open up the case, because these cases open from the bezel, and then you pull everything out from the top, not from the case back. Sometimes I've seen 222s, people try to pry them open from the back and screw up the case back. You have to unscrew the bezel and pull everything out from the top. Anyways, this watch, against an estimate of 40 to 60,000, sold for 113,400, stronger than some steel models, which is generally flip-flop. Usually the steel models are more desirable than yellow gold models, even though Vacheron reintroduced the 222 with the gold model. Maybe they'll throw in a steel one in the future, who knows. But the gold ones, I've never seen one trade for quite this much money, not at least in my memory. If I'm wrong, let me know in the comments below. But it was a very strong result for a very strong watch. Moving along from the big results, we have a bunch of mid-tier results. I think it's important, though, to start with a big result that kind of transitions into the mid results and to explain why that happened. So next we move to lot 44, which was a Rolex Daytona reference 6239 Paul Newman with a white dial. Now, guys, this watch was very, very nice. There was like maybe one little flaw in one of the lume dots, but overall an extremely attractive example. It was a watch that I would assume would retail if you bought it from somebody like us in the low 300K range. Against an estimate of 150 to 250,000, it sold for a whopping $453,600. I don't really know how to explain that. Like I said earlier in the video, sometimes there are anomalies, or sometimes people just get swept away when the watches in exceptional condition do come up to market. That being said, if you look at lots 68 and 78, you see two other Paul Newmans that Christie's offered in the sale that achieve far less results that you would think, well, what happened really? So they had lot 68, which was a 6262 Paul Newman, actually a pretty rare reference made for only 1 year. Against an estimate of 100 to 200, it sold for 195,300. So right at the high end of the estimate, but in reality, that watch should have sold for more. But if you look closer at the watch, not that it was so horrible, it just was not great. The condition was very average. It was an honest example. And the same goes for lot 78, which was a black dial 6239 Paul Newman. Against an estimate of 120 to 180,000, it sold right in the middle for $151,200, which is extremely low for a Paul Newman. Whoever picked that up got an exceptional deal. Again, it was not a perfect example. There was some wear around the edge of the dial. The lume wasn't perfect, and I would say a perfect example of that should be at least $100,000 more. I think it just goes to show you that average condition watches will always bring average condition prices, while the tippy top absolute best condition watches are always going to bring super strong results. They're going to be very difficult to buy in auction, and sometimes even bring wacky prices like lot 150 did at over $450,000 against general market price of over $100,000 less than that. Another quick example before we move into the what I call soft market watches was lot 69, which was a Rolex Date 8 reference 18038 with a lapis lazuli stone dial. Against an estimate of 20 to 40,000, it sold right at the higher end of $35,280. I know for a fact that the real retail market of that watch is closer to 45 to 50,000 for a really nice example, but this is another example of always having to look closely at these stone dial watches when you are bidding or buying on them. This one did have 2 cracks at the date window at 12 o'clock, which is very common on these watches, but will always vastly affect the pricing. Now, moving on to the quote-unquote soft market watches. Now, when I say soft market, I think these are watches that used to be very, very expensive, very, very popular in the marketplace, and now have kind of fizzled off. Interest has waned a lot, and I'm not saying it's necessarily something that you should go run out and buy, but if you were ever interested in these watches, now might be a good time to consider looking into purchasing them or consider adding them to your collection, as prices are, in my opinion, at an all-time low, or at least an all-time low within the past, let's say, decade or so. First, we have lot 45, which was a Rolex Milgauss reference 6541. This was Rolex's first reference Milgauss, a historically important watch The Rolex Milgauss 6541 was made in 2 different variants, with a smooth bezel and with a black bezel, black rotating bezel, I should say. And this particular example is a smooth bezel with CIA provenance. It was used, or it was owned by somebody who was an operator for the CIA during the Bay of Pigs invasion. Had really cool history. It had full set with box and papers as well. The condition on it was very average. These watches were from the 50s, and they were used and they were abused. Obviously, there's very few that have held up and that it remained in excellent condition. Against an estimate of $150,000 to $250,000, it failed to meet the low end. I don't know if it got bid up to that point. I don't know if maybe somebody bid 120, but Christie's wouldn't sell it because the low estimate was 150,000. Either way, it failed to sell. It was a pass for them, which is very surprising because these watches used to trade anywhere from 300 to 500,000 depending on the condition, and this one failed to even sell at the low estimate of 150,000 plus their 26%. So it's interesting to see that a lot of these 50s and 60s sports Rolex, some of them are still very much in vogue, but others are not. So if you're considering a 6541, now might be a buyer's market, and if you're looking to buy one, it's a great time to try to haggle with anybody who might have one in stock. Following the 6541 in numerical order of the catalog, another result I found to be very soft, or a softening in this market, is the Rolex Star Dial. This is lot 67, reference 6098. In my opinion, one of the most beautiful watches Rolex ever made. We have a 36mm semi-bubble back yellow gold case with a honeycomb dial that has star indices. There's an alleged about dozen of these made. They trade, or I should say traded, in the $150,000 to $200,000 range. This one against an estimate of $60,000 to $80,000 sold for $100,800. So you might be saying, well, it broke the estimate, but in reality, if you look historically at what these watches generally trade for, this was a pretty low result in my opinion. Apparently it was also from the original owner, and it looked to be in pretty honest condition. I didn't inspect the watch in person. Based on their catalog photos, it looked pretty decent, pretty nice. I would have expected to sell at least closer to the $150K range. Whoever got this watch, I think, got a really big bargain. And the last lot that I picked out of a softening the market kind of goes hand in hand with the Milgauss. This is lot 76. It is a Rolex Submariner, reference 5513, with a so-called Explorer dial. The Explorer dials are from the early 60s, 62, 63, and have indices at 3, 6, and 9 that have actually the numbers 3, 6, and 9. This watch was owned prior by Adam Scott, the golfer. It did have some condition issues. The case was average, the hands were replaced, the bezel was replaced, and the dial wasn't perfect. On these watches, in particular the Explorer dials, they were factory with this beautiful gloss lacquer, and when they remain that high gloss finish, they bring a lot of money. This one, against an estimate of $50,000 to $100,000, almost didn't sell. It sold right at the low, $50,400 all in. These watches, if you would try to buy one for under $100,000 several years ago, people would laugh at you almost in any condition. Now people are very, very picky about the condition of them, and the delta between an average example and an exceptional example is almost $200,000. It is absolutely crazy, meaning you buy one like this for $50,000. We even have one on our site that is similar condition, I would say a little bit better than this one, or versus a mint example that will run you $250,000. If you are willing to accept a watch that has honest wear and character, and you are looking for an Explorer dial sub, now is the perfect time to buy one. I've never seen the market so depressed for this particular variant of Submariner probably my entire career. Moving along to Sotheby's, their big results were kind of in a vacuum, I guess, so to speak, because they all had some crazy provenance. There were some other watches that did big results and had some strong prices as well. All of the watches that had a massive result all had one thing in common. They were either owned by somebody important or had a really cool story behind them. Now, quick aside, I'm not going to be discussing the Tom Brady sale. I think Sotheby's probably had their hands tied, but they really should have put his watches in the regular watch sale and not did a separate sale just for his watches for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think watches belong with watches, not mixed in with his jersey and other memorabilia. And number two, it didn't really feel special because he had so many watches, and kudos to him to being an actual watch enthusiast and having a large collection. But when you have that many watches by one person, it doesn't feel special. You know, when we think of like the crazy provenance watches of the past, the Marlon Brando GMT, the John Lennon Patek, these were watches that are so clearly identifiable as theirs. When you have a collection of 20, 30 watches, owning one of Tom Brady's watches doesn't feel as special because there's so many others out there. That being said, there were a lot of watches that achieved pretty strong results because of the provenance. There were like some basic Sky Dwellers and Tudor Black Bays that sold for like 50K, well above obviously what the real market value is for a normal one. And then there were some average results, such as the John Player Special that sold for what a normal one without any provenance would sell for. So just as if it wasn't even owned by Tom Brady. But anyways, putting those aside, Sotheby's had some fantastic watches provenance-wise in their sale. Lots 9 and 10 were owned by Al Giddings. Al Giddings was the cinematographer, if I recall correctly, on the Titanic, and did like 13 dives down there. The watches were actually dove down to the Titanic in preparation for the film or something to that effect. And the gold, even worn by Bill Paxton in the movie of the Titanic. Lot 9 was a 1680 red against an estimate of 20 to 40,000, and in totally worn trash condition. The guy used and loved his watch. It still sold for $54,000, which is a massive result for a worn and beat to shit 1680 red. And lot 10 was a 16808, so solid yellow gold sapphire crystal Submariner. Again, this was the one that was worn in the movie against an estimate of 30 to 60,000. It went absolutely bonkers and sold for $264,000. Again, just goes to show you that really people gravitate towards interesting people and interesting stories, and provenance watches are always in the right setting going to bring a lot of money. They also had lot 19, this was absolutely crazy, Rolex Day-Date reference 1803 in yellow gold. It was President Gamal Nasser of Egypt's watch, gifted, I believe, to somebody who then it went to his grandson. There was all this provenance. Against an estimate of 30 to 60,000, it ended up at $840,000. Now, guys, this wasn't like some crazy rare variant of a Day-Date. It was a nice early example. Nothing out of the ordinary, though. If it had no provenance, especially in the condition that it was in and without a bracelet, I would have offered maybe, I don't know, $7,000, $8,000 for. $840,000. Obviously, several people really appreciated the provenance and the history behind that watch, and it achieved a massive result. And then we can't not talk about lot 128, which was a Hoyer Monaco reference 1133B, but this was no ordinary Monaco. This was Steve McQueen's own Monaco and was the one that he wore in the filming of Le Mans. Apparently, there are some others that were owned by Steve McQueen because he had like 6 of them during the film, but this one was actually verified as being one that he actually wore in the movie. Against an estimate of $500,000 at $1 million, it ended at $1.44 million all in. A massive result for a massively important watch, maybe the most important Hoyer of all time. We have one weird result. I literally wrote weird in here. I think it's a really good example of how we don't know everything with vintage collecting, especially with a brand such as this, which happens to be Rolex. They are very sparse with their information. They tell us absolutely nothing. And I've always preached that when you're selling a watch or buying a watch, you want to buy as little story as possible. And I'm not talking about story like provenance story. I'm talking about you don't want people questioning the watch. Is it original? Is something wrong with it? You don't want to have to explain any more than is reasonably necessary. This is lot 20. It was a reference 6238, so pre-Daytona reference in 18 karat yellow gold, and it was fit with a really rare black John Player Special Paul Newman dial, a dial that you would typically see in a different reference, the Daytona reference cases, such as a 6239 or 6241 or even a 6264. It was also fit with a black matching Bakelite bezel, which was not available on the 6238. So it was a watch that traditionally no one has ever seen born like that. Traditionally, you'll see a yellow gold 6238 with a matching gold bezel and a regular silver pre-Daytona dial without Daytona text, or having absolutely nothing to do with the Daytona. I saw this watch in person. I held it in my hands. I spoke with all of the specialists. It came apparently from the original owner. And even though it's going to be impossible to verify that this watch was born that way, I truly felt that it was. The watch seemed completely untouched with, based on their story, if you take it at face value, i.e. the story that was told to the Sotheby staff, the watch was absolutely born that way. Maybe Rolex had a leftover case from the 6238 era, and the client wanted that black JPS look at the time. Again, market prices weren't what they are now back in the 60s, so it's not out of the ordinary, and I know several confirmed cases of people walking in to buy a brand new Rolex in the 60s or 70s and changing the dial on the spot at Rolex because that's what they wanted to do. Now, meanwhile, this watch had an estimate of $500,000 to $1.5 million, a really broad range. I think no one really knew what this watch was worth. and it ended up selling for $768,000, a far cry from the $1.2 million that Tom Brady's real JPS sold for in his sale. And like I said before, his Tom Brady's JPS sold for a normal price, what a non-provenance JPS should sell for. So did the buyer get a $500,000 discount, or did somebody overpay for something that's not correct? I don't think we'll ever really have the answer. I think the price is indicative of what the market thinks it's worth, and I also think the price is indicative of what the sum of the value of the parts are. So for example, I would say that that dial alone is worth $500,000. That case alone is worth $100,000 to $150,000. The bracelet alone has value, and I think the client paid what the sum of the value of the parts are worth, and I think it was absolutely a fair, normal price. And I think it's just one of those weird results that we may never see again. There were a few mid results in the Sotheby sale, not a lot, but there were some worth mentioning. Lot 43, which was a Patek Philippe perpetual calendar chronograph, reference 15 ATJ, my personal grail, if that matters to anybody. This one was estimated at $400,000 to $600,000. We generally see good examples selling for $650,000 to $1 million. This one sold for $456,000 all in. The condition, even by their own estimation, was very fair and average. It was nothing special, nothing great. There was some damage on the dial. Case was a little bit polished. It was an average price for an average condition watch, although one I'd still love to own. Lot 68 was a 6263 Sigma white panda dial, estimated at $40,000 to $80,000. I thought somebody got a smoking deal on this watch. I'm actually kind of sad that I didn't bid on it. It sold for $48,000. The watch was very fair condition, average, nothing special, but nothing spectacular either. I think this is one that kind of fell into cracks, especially when you look at it in the context of lot 198, which is in their second session of the sale, which was a 6263 black big red dial, which the black big red dials are more popular than a white Sigma dial. Granted, this one had serviced pushers, had wear in the registers. It was not an amazing example. Still sold for $90,000 all in against an estimate of $60,000 to $120,000, way more than I would have paid for it. Moving along to what I consider the soft market watches, again, watches that I think are kind of under the radar right now, or I shouldn't say under the radar, kind of have fallen off the radar and people really aren't paying a lot of attention to them, and the prices have really fallen. First, we have lot 36. This was a Rolex chronograph circa 1940s, reference 4313. It was a really cool watch in my opinion, a watch that people kind of overlook, or this era of Rolex chronographs people overlook because everybody's so focused on the Daytona. It's a triple register yellow gold chronograph. The estimate was $20,000 to $40,000. And it sold right at the low for $22,800. It also had some interesting provenance, owned by Harold Gast, who was a producer and writer during the time period. Again, there's a lot of value, I think, in the era of Rolex chronograph collecting before the Daytona. A lot of these markets used to be very, very strong. Now they're very, very deflated as people really only focus on the Daytona. So if you're looking for something interesting and unique, maybe start looking there. Next is a really weird one, lot 67. It was a Rolex Daytona reference 6263 Paul Newman with an RCO Soto dial. What that means is Oyster is at the bottom, so Rolex Cosmograph Oyster is the only time that Rolex has a dial with Oyster at the bottom. And to be honest, this was the first Paul Newman, I think, to break $1 million at auction in the Daytona Ultimatum sale. This one, against an estimate of $180,000 to $360,000, sold for $240,000. If you had told me an RCO could be bought for $240,000, I would have told you you're absolutely crazy. I think it's a market that is severely depressed. I know when you're talking about Paul Newmans, especially 6263s, everybody wants that Panda dial. The Panda dial 6263 market has not gone anywhere, but it seems like the RCO market has. Again, I didn't really look at the watch, but the result there is there in any case. Moving along, there was a lot of Hoyers in the sale. I thought it interesting to look at lots 102 and 104. 102 was a 2446 first generation Octavia, so the big subs. This watch used to be at Hoyer's peak in like 2016, 2017, over $100,000. This one sold for $24,000 all in against an estimate of $20,000 to $40,000. If you're looking to get into an early Octavia, now is absolutely the time. Same with lot 104, which was reference 7753, the Skipperera, one of the most popular Hoyer Carreras of all time, against a estimate of $30,000 to $60,000. This sold for $54,000 all in. I didn't look at the watch. I didn't have time to look at a lot of Sotheby's lots. It looked pretty nice from the catalog photo. I would have expected this to sell closer to 100,000. They're not really easy to find, so even if you are looking for one, you might not be able to find it, but it might be a time to consider turning up that heat in terms of your search for it if you are in the market for one. Last lot was lot 243. This was a reference 105-012-66 CB Speedmaster. So the CB was the case maker that had these wider lugs, which everybody seemed to used to love. This watch against an estimate, and it was really nice, against an estimate of $5,000 to $10,000, sold for $6,600 all in on bracelet, if I remember correctly. Look, there's no way to sugarcoat this. The vintage Speedmaster market has severely dropped. This is a watch that you would have not been able to buy for anywhere under $12,000 to $15,000 a few years ago. This one's selling for $6,600. Just shows you the state of the Speedmaster market, which I think is a little accurate. I think it's worth a little bit more, but the fact is you could pick up a really nice 321 twisted lug case under $10,000 now. I think it is a great time to buy vintage Speedmasters if you are looking for one. Anyways, guys, I really appreciate everybody's support throughout this year. It's been a fantastic year. I really enjoyed making all of this content for you guys, and I really hope you guys have enjoyed watching it. Thank you so much for watching. I can't wait to see you guys in the next year. Everybody have a happy holidays and happy New Year's, and we'll see you next time. Bye. Recording. Not even recording for me to tell you how bad you are at your job. Are you recording actually? Yes, I see the red light. It's gonna be a fun video. Let's get into it. Let's stick it. Yeah. Are we good? Goddamn, guy. Half my day is waiting for you.
Nice. Just reconstruct.
Maybe soon I'll have a competent videographer. Or I swear to God, if this video sound doesn't come out right because you had to test out this new boom mic, I'm not recording it again.